All right, Kaf Ches, the 28th day of Sivan, was the day that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, our Rebbe, came to the USA. And in that, the Rebbe said we began a new era in Judaism. The month of Sivan in general is a month where God reveals himself. It was the month when God gave the Torah. And the Kaf Chet Sivan was also another revelation of God in the world. That's when the Moshiach arrived in America. The Rebbe is the Moshiach, and he arrived in America. The job of the Moshiach is to educate the whole world that God exists and how to serve God. And up to then, in America, that idea, where the majority of Jews lived at that time, maybe even today, I don't know. The majority of how do you say, Jews that knew that they were Jews. It could be that in Russia there lived more Jews, but they just didn't know they were Jews. Okay. So they came to America. Not only that, in Russia in those days also, it was impossible to spread out Judaism. You just couldn't do it. This was talking about in 1940, 41. Right? The Iron Curtain only fell in 1990, 91. So it was impossible. Okay, so all the Jews are there in America, and the Rebbe arrived in America, and immediately he put the work of his father-in-law, who was there, lived there 9 years. They were together, but he put the work into high gear, into higher gear. And mainly, what was the gear? Is to spread out the teachings of Hasidut, which the teachings of Hasidut are the teachings of the Mashiach. What's the idea of Mashiach? To educate the world what God is. That people should come, like we just finished learning, to love God and to be in awe of God and to feel the purpose of God and to rejoice in God and be happy with God and the Creator, making the Creator revealed in the creation, to make this world a healthy place and a good place and a blessed place. Okay. And that began in Kaf Ches Sivan. And the Rebbe explained that that's the idea of a chazaka, 3 times 3 times 3. 3 is a chazaka. When you do something 3 times, you can suppose that you're going to continue doing it. Well, that's 3 times 3 times 3 is 27, and 28 is the day after that. And that was beginning to fill the world with godliness. Okay. And this whole idea that the revelation of Torah Hasidut, this whole idea that the revelation of the Torah Hasidut, it gives the power to reveal godliness in the world and more elevation, more and more power. This is especially stressed at what the Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov. There's a story in Chabad, Chabad accepts the story. Where did the whole Hasidic movement begin? How it began. How did it begin? Okay, so again, what is the Hasidic movement? The Hasidic movement is a movement to bring Mashiach. As the Maimonides says, that the whole purpose of the creation of the world is only to bring Mashiach, and Mashiach will reveal how important every detail of this creation is, how important every human being is to God. More important than all the upper worlds. That's what Mashiach is going to do. But Mashiach has to educate us. So it says the Mashiach, in general, Mashiach is going to end all the problems of the world, and he will educate the world. Right, good. So it says the Baal Shem Tov, when he was 27 years old or something, he had an experience on Rosh Hashanah that his soul went to the upper chambers of the Mashiach, and he met the Mashiach, and he asked the Mashiach the same question that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked the Mashiach, 1,300 years earlier. When are you going to come? Emotai katimar. And the Mashiach gave him a little bit different answer than he gave to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He said a sentence from Proverbs, when your well springs are spread out. Yafutzu, when they are spread out, your well springs, when they are spread, your well springs out. Now the Torah is called water, and the source of this water is the well springs. He says you should take the wellspring itself, and you have to spread it around. The wellspring itself is the source of the Torah. That's the ideas of Kabbalah, Chassidut. And you have to spread it outward. In other words, to the furthest and furthest of places. Just give me 1 second. The idea popped in my mind. One second. Okay. Okay, so it has to be spread outward. Dvar Kamapami was said many times, Shakol Achat, that every one of these three words expresses something important for our service, what we're supposed to do. Yafutsu, spread out, Mainotecha, your well springs, Chutza, outward. Like I just told you, Ubiyotam Lashono, because they are languages of the Torah, this is a sentence from Proverbs, is this shows that it says something true. And it must have Yafutsu means what? If these are words of the Torah, so it must be, when it says Yafutsu, spread, that you have to spread out, it must be really spreading out, true spreading out. When it says Mayanotecha, your well springs, it must be really true in a complete way. And when it says Chutza, it must also mean a true and an ultimate way of outward. In other words, the deepest secrets of the Torah must be spread out, and they must be spread out to the furthest corner. Let's go. What does it mean, chutza? What does it mean? And chutza spread out to the furthest places. This is the opposite of completion. When you have something that's whole, so it's whole, when you spread it out, then it loses its wholesome, it loses its integrity. Sheshayach, this is also bifinim, kedusha of elokut. Completion is only like holiness, godliness, the holy of holies, for instance. It had to be an exact measurement. If you spread it out, then it's not the holy of holies anymore. You open up the walls, not all. The explanation is this. So, if so, how can you take something chutza outward and use it in its true sense of the Torah, that it has to be something complete and whole? It says the word chutza, spreading the ideas of Chassidut, Kabbalah, out. What does it mean, spreading it out, outward, breaking all the boundaries? What is it? If there's no boundaries, then it's not complete anymore. It's not defined. There's no definition. What does it mean, chutza? Harizeh, more. This shows on what does it mean? A true inyan of outside. What's outside? Okay, first of all, there's nothing outside of God. So how can we spread godliness outside in a true sense? I mean, we're talking about God. Nothing is outside of God. Like we say, Einod Milvado. So what is the true meaning? What's the true sense of outside? Outside of what? Right? Outside of my house? That's not the true meaning of outside. Outside must mean that it's outside of everything. How can that be outside of God? There's no such thing as outside of God. Mashkatuv, the Torah, that's what it says in the language, chutza, outside. The intention is the true meaning of outside, like it is chutza, Megala Elokus, how the outside world reveals godliness. Davka betoch the al yedei achutz, only by means of what seems to be totally separate from God. A tachtona, namely what conceals God totally, only there can be revealed the shlemus v'tachlis shlemus, the emes of godliness. She'ein od milvado, there's nothing except for him. Afilu b'chutza, even on the outside, like it says before, levushim b'teva. A koach, the power to reveal this in the chutza, this is by means of yafutzu ma'inatecha, spreading out the well springs. Let me just give you a small example. I mean, maybe this is a good example. Stalin, communism. Communism was the ultimate opposite of God. We can do it all on our own. We'll provide for everyone. We'll provide meaning. We are the fathers. We are your mother. We are your source. There's no God. God is bad. Religion is bad. Religion just takes you away from the real truth. What is the real truth? That all there is this physical world, and we're just animals. And that's the ideas of communism. We're all going to be equal, and everybody's going to be happy, and everybody's going to have everything they need, with these beautiful, amazing slogans that they added to the right? But the main thing is Boga Niet, no God, no God. That Stalin, Yamach Shemo, may his name be blotted out forever, he actually helped get the previous Rebbe out of Russia. He helped 1927. He helped the previous Rebbe to get out. We're going to celebrate that soon. What's called Yud Beit Tammuz. There's somebody's knocking out. They're working outside of my window. So that's the furthest away you can possibly have, the furthest of the of afar. And they themselves help the Rebbe. This is already started. This is like Paro sending out the Jewish people from Egypt. So specifically, when the furthest away from God, they reveal God, that's what's called, that's the biggest proof that God exists. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit because Stalin did not say, God exists. He just miraculously, without his understanding, helped the Rebbe to get out, and he freed all of his books and everything like that. Okay, so it was maybe not consciously so. So this is not the true example of him changing his mind. But at least in that one aspect, you saw that it is possible for the furthest of the far, the furthest of the far, the most distant from godliness, to participate in godliness. That's what it means to be spread out. Why did that happen? Because the previous Rebbe spread out the ideas of Hasidut. That's Mainotecha. Hafatzat HaMayanot, to spread out the well springs of the inside of the Torah in a true way and a complete way, in a way that it will reveal the good which is found in evil. What's the good that's found in evil? That man has the ability to choose. God wants us to have free will, and he wants us to have the ability to choose evil if we want to. God doesn't want us to make that choice, but it's up to us, right? It's up to us. Man, so to speak, can make himself totally separate, apparently, from God. Shehu Messiah, that all of a sudden this farthest away helps godliness. This is what Hasidut does. Hasidut comes and teaches that everything is created by God constantly for a purpose. And man, especially, that's the ultimate purpose, because man is the lowest of the low, especially the Jews, because they have the ability to choose to go against God. And even though that God doesn't want you to make that choice, but from the dignity of man, God gives, and for the humanness of man, God gives us the ability to choose. And that's what Hasidut does. It enables us to make the right choice, but not to take away our freedom of choice, but to use our power of free choice, that we could use that to choose to be like Stalin, and use that free choice to choose. And even Stalin himself can use that free choice to choose to do good. But Yesh Lomar, we can say, why? By becoming aware of how good God is, how close God is, that the Torah is true. Yesh Lomar, we can say that the power to do this, that the power to do this came from the imprisonment and the freedom of the first Rebbe of Chabad. He was also put into prison, not by Stalin. In his days, he was put in by the Tsar, and the accusers were, but like the previous Rebbe, his accusers were also Jews. And unlike the previous Rebbe, the accusers of the previous Rebbe were non-religious Jews. They were Jews that were against Judaism in general. They were against God. And the accusers of the first Rebbe of Chabad, they were very, very religious and serious Jews, and they were Jews that were against Hasidut. The fact that the first Rebbe of Chabad, the one who wrote the Tanya, he was put into prison. He was put into prison for 53 days. And all the time, even though he was not actually sentenced to death, but he was under the threat of death constantly. At any moment, they could sentence him to death, and he was sentenced for treason. Treason is punishable by death. The first Rebbe of Chabad, that's Yutet Kislev, which we'll talk about. That's also in the third month, just like the giving of the Torah was Sivan. You do it like it's known that as then began the main revelation of Yafutzo Mainatach Chutza. This was like, 250 years ago. Bekesher, 270 years. Bekesher with his, regarding his imprisonment and his release, the first Rebbe of Chabad, that he wrote the Tanya. After he wrote the Tanya, he was in prison. Kariti, when I read in the book of Psalms, in the sentence Parabashalom Nashi, Psalm 55, when I read in the Psalm Parabashalom Nashi, redeem in peace my heart, I went out in peace from jail. Therefore, it was accepted by the Hasidim, this song, Parabashalom Nashi. You ever heard the song? Regarding to the Gula. Parabashalom Nashi mikravli ki berabim Hayu imodi. Ishmael. Ever heard? Ani eftach bo, ani eftach bo, ani eftach bo. Nice song. Part of a shalom. This is in redoubt because the first Rebbe of Chabad was put into prison under the threat of death, and miraculously got out, unexplainable, got out. And this was the release, not just the Rebbe. The Rebbe said that I saw this as the release also of Torah Hasidut, that now I can start explaining the ideas in great length, and that's what we're learning in the morning. This Torah, the Likuti Torah. The Yesh Lomar, we can say that one of the explanations, the connection of Parah B'Shalom Nafshi with the future with the redemption of the Alter Rebbe and the future redemption by means of the Mashiach, that the main thing of spreading out these well springs out, which that's what the Mashiach said to the Baal Shem Tov, will bring revelation of Mashiach. After Parah B'Shalom Nafshi, it's written, Ki b'Rabi Moya Imodi. Because after Parah B'Shalom Nafshi, it says that in many they were with me. Shazem more al klolos. That's the whole thing of Rabim and Reshuta Rabim, many, and like a public domain, namely the whole entire world, the world which seems to be totally separate from God, becomes in a way of imodi, with me. Shalozu bilavad, not only that, that you will not be necessary, that you will not need yageya, to put in an effort to do something in the world. Asot mashu kadesh, that the Rabbim, that the multitude of the world won't disturb us. Right? The goal of Judaism is not just that the non-Jews should not disturb us, that we will remain undisturbed. Ela adara, but even more, Rabbim, that the world, that the multitudes, in other words, the apparent public domain, will be with me, will help me. That the world will actually help the Jews serve God by serving God themselves. Ajazeh Messiah will help even more Rishut Yachid and make the world into a private domain, namely the private domain of the creator of the universe. What's the difference when you're a private domain and a public domain? When you're a private domain, you're in your house, you're secure. That's called peace. When a person realizes that the whole world is the public domain of God and that God wants us to be here, he wants us to, when you realize the world is a private domain of God, when we realize the world is the private domain of God and that God wants us to be here, we're his guests. So you feel more at peace, you feel more secure. On the other hand, you have to realize you're only a guest, you're not the boss. If you think you're the boss, then that makes a public domain. Why? Because everybody thinks they're the boss. So you're in the world where it ends up practically no one is really the boss, right? Because everybody thinks, well, no, you're not the boss, I'm the boss. But if you think that God is the boss, which is the truth, then you're in a private domain and you're secure, but you're the guest of God. And as a guest, you have your certain obligations, what you have to do, right? As a guest, the owner says, listen, do me a favor, wash the dishes, clean the floor. I have a little work to do outside in the garden. Paint the house, paint the fence. If you're a guest, you want to be a good guest. So you do what you want to be a partner. That's the idea of making the world into a private domain, realizing that there's a owner. And that's done by means of Chassidut. Rabim hayu imodi. In the multitude, in the public domain, we were with him, we were with God. Therefore, he said, Paul, this makes Parah B'Shalom Nafshi, this makes peace in the world. Shapadia, that the redemption, the future redemption, and the redemption we can experience now is B'derech Shalom, is in a way of peace, without any war at all. Al derech kafi shaya, like it was in the days of King Solomon. Shakal umos, all the nations were completely surrendered and harmonious with King Solomon, and there was no need for war. But until that they actually helped. And therefore, King Solomon is called Shlomo. Why? Because he made peace in the word Shalom. Kibiyamov, in his days, there was peace. Until Shazeh, Parah B'Shalom Nafshi, right? This is the song that's sung by the first Rebbe of Chabad when he got out of prison and started really spreading out Chassidut. That made peace in the world. Kayal Tachlis Hashlemos. And it also refers to an ultimate, how do you say, uh, completeness. Shalom also means to be complete. Asher Ela, that those people who were against him, namely the Tsar and all the church and everything, they became his friends. Kafisha Yiyah, like it will be in the future redemption. Like it says, Azafoch Alamim, like it says, then I will transform all of the nations, all of the nations suffer Barura to one language to serve God, Shechem Shalom, in one group. Like it says, like the second Rebbe explains this. Okay. The outcome, the results of what Baal Shem Tov said, spreading out the well springs outward by means of our Rebbes. The first Rebbe of Chabad getting out of prison, and the second Rebbe of Chabad establishing the city of Lubavitcher, till again the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, he established the yeshivas of Tomchei Tamimim to teach Chassidut in an orderly way. There were many, many levels and many, many stages in the seven or the 9 generations from the Baal Shem Tov, 7 generations from the Alter Rebbe, first Rebbe, and 9 generations from the Baal Shem Tov, and until our generation. After the first Rebbe of Chabad, that he lived in the city called Liazhne. And afterwards he moved to a city called Liadi. That's where his main dwelling was. Then our rabbis, they had many, many generations that lived in Lubavitch. And afterwards, like 102 years later, in the 7th generation, they came to Rostov. The 7th generation from the Baal Shem Tov. They came to Rostov, like we said before, in the beginning of the First World War, by this Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Rebbe of Chabad. And afterwards, they came to Leningrad. And then after Leningrad, that was the previous Rebbe of Lubavitcher Rebbe. And then it was also called Peterburg. It used to be called. I think now it's called Peterburg again. And after that, when Rebbe was speaking, it wasn't called Peterburg. It was still called Leningrad. And after that, the previous Rebbe was evicted from Russia, got out of prison miraculously, came to Poland, until finally came the last stage that when it came to America, in which America is on the opposite side of the world where the Torah was given. There, it's called the Chetzia Kadar Tachton, the lower half of the globe. And there came to many places, until finally it came to the Binyan, which is now called 770, which is called. And the Rebbe pointed out 770 is the numerical value of Beit Mashiach. That was the Mashiach. That was the address, and still is today, of the center of Chabad activities. So we see that even though that all the generations, there was the revelation of Chassidut and the spreading of Chassidut more and more outward, but specifically in the bottom part, in America, that where there was no giving of the Torah, there was the revelation of Chassidut, Hafatzat Mayanot Chutza, even more than it was before. When the Chabad was in Russia, so they couldn't spread out Chassidut. You couldn't really spread out any foreign ideas in Russia, especially under communism. You were just lucky they didn't catch you and kill you. So you couldn't spread out to the masses, go on the radio and talk about the oneness of God and how God loves everybody. Couldn't they? They believed they were, how do you say, vehement, vicious. There's even a better word, but I can't think of it. Anyway, they were vicious, rabid. Oh, that's the word. Rabid atheists, and rabid atheists, and especially anti-Semites. The ones who were the biggest anti-Semites were the Jews themselves. There were the Yevsechsia. But tremendous, so that was impossible. Then the previous Rebbe, when he was put into Poland, so in Poland also, he had the ability to spread out Judaism, but there was a lot of politics and a lot of opposition going on there. The other religious groups were already very well seated there. Chabad was relatively new in Poland, and he had a lot of opposition there also. Until finally came to America. Finally, when it came to America, he was able to spread out Chassidut more than ever before. The only difficulty in America was the unwillingness of the Jews to hear anything about Judaism, right? They were just very cold to Judaism. Jews succeeded over there, and they were accepted in the media and in the theaters and universities, and everywhere. Jews rose up to the top and to the, all sorts of places in movies, and Jews made it. They didn't want anything to do with Judaism. That was an old thing. They didn't want to lose their Judaism, though. They didn't want to lose their name that they were Jews. But Judaism itself, what are you talking about? God, what? So that was the only problem. But the government and enemies, they didn't make any problems, particularly to spreading out. So therefore, the previous Rebbe made it his job to try to spread out and to at least say as much Chassidut as he possibly could in a way that this reached to the lowest of the lowest people, like we see simply. And the Rebbe said, I'm just continuing the work of the previous Rebbe. The Rebbe, for a good portion of his life, he went to university. The previous Rebbe sent him. So there was, how long? 5 years. Anyways, he went to university, he received degrees. They say that he received degrees on a lot of things. I read Professor Brownover said that he received degrees on a lot, but most notably, he received degrees in engineering. And the Professor Brownover said also in philosophy and in chemistry. Anyway, the Rebbe was very, very, what's the word for it? There's a good word, which slips my mind. Can't remember any of he was very, the well-read in all matters of this world, in politics and philosophy and history and everything. It was a very tremendous mind. I think could be other people have a mind like that. But anyway, he had a tremendous mind. The reason for this is realizing the greatness of Matan, the giving of the Matan Torah, that the giving of the Torah had not really reached this low world. In the lowest places, because where was the Torah given? Like we say, the Torah was given on the other side of the globe in Israel. So it reached like to Europe and things like that, but it didn't really reach America, so to speak. Even though when God gave the Torah, he gave it to the whole world as the creator of the world. But still, it didn't reach it in a personal way, in a human way. That's what it says, Yitrona Oretz Bakalu. That's what it says, we said in Ecclesiastes. The earth is better in every way. Why? Because the earth is the lowest, and from the earth, everything grows. Similarly can be understood after the giving of the Torah itself, specifically in this second half, the lower part of the globe where the Torah that wasn't affected by the giving of the Torah, the opposite side of the world where the Torah was given, that, so to speak, the Torah was not revealed, is Nasit Shleimutit Galut, as we revealed the total the revelation of how the earth is the highest place of all. Namely, the places where Torah was not revealed, to reveal Torah there, that reveals a whole new novelty, a whole new world. Shleimus the Gila the Torah, Penimis the Torah, in a way Yafutsu minus Tachachutza. Ukamarumas, it's almost like saying, a person, the heavier thing you can lift up is that shows your power, right? A person can lift up 500 pounds, they do a deadlift, 1,000 pounds. Some guy comes up and says, well, I want to show you something. With one hand, I can lift up 5,000 pounds. Watch this. That's amazing. Well, that's what the Moshiach said to the Baal Shem Tov. You have to spread out the ideas of Chassidut, the furthest, lowest places, the heaviest places that's impossible to elevate them. That's what you have to do. And the lowest and the heaviest places that's impossible to raise up, that was America. That was the lowest. And the idea, and when you can lift that up, that really shows the greatness of God, of Chassidut. That's the idea why the center of Chabad settled in a place which was called 770. Like it's known, 770, this is the same numerical value as Paratzta. Ufaratzta, like God said to Jacob, Ufras, you will spread out. Yafutsu minatecha. Paratzta means the same thing. Lafi, because like it's Yesh Lomar, we can say Yesh Lomar, we can say the connection is the number 770. This is showing how Chassidut is spread out to the furthest and the furthest lowest of lowest places, the places which are hardest to elevate in America. The 770, that's and it's settled in a place where the address was 770. 770 is the numerical value of Paratzta, spreading out. But this number, first of all, let's take it number at a time. The number 7, this indicates on the completion of the 7 days of creation. Right? Isn't it very interesting that 7 days of creation, the whole world, as far as I know, they have 7 days. The week is 7 days. 7 days. They said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then they go back again. 7. Right? Why the whole world did that after this thing? As far as I know, even in China and places like that, I'm not sure, but Napoleon for a while wanted to make a 10-day week. He tried to do it, didn't work out. I think there are some people that still keep it, but 10-day week. But it didn't work out. Somehow or other, ingrained in nature, the number 7 is a number of completeness. That completes one cycle, and you start again 7. That also corresponds. The reason is because it corresponds to the 7 emotions of God. The Hashpah B'Kol Dargos. This is all the aspects of godliness. That's according to Kabbalah. This is the completion of number 7, right? 7. The completion of it is when 7 is multiplied by 10 and then again by 10. 10 times 10 times 7. That's 700. So 700 with 10 times 7. So you have 700. The number 7 shows completeness. 70 is another type of completeness. 700 is another type of completeness. So you have 770. That shows on a total completeness, a level. Therefore, therefore it is the numerical value of paratha, spreading out. Because the completion of spreading out godliness and Torah and the secrets of the Torah means spreading